Hello, welcome back again to the second of two videos dealing with the mix and the arrange of the track. We got to about bar 97 in the first video, and before we progress from there, I just want to focus on this sound, the intervals. Now at the moment I've got it playing here. And it's really nice, it's on the Prophet 5, or the Prophet 5V I should say. But much like I was talking about in the previous video about adding elements in and then finding that you need to subtract, that being a really important part of the production process, I think the same thing is applied here, because when I listen back, I don't find a particular place for this sound to go. So when you're making sounds sound good together and you're coming up with ideas, it's always good to try and come up with a few more that you may not need, because then you get the ability to choose. And when you're making the arrangement of a track, you'll probably find that there are certain elements that really work, other ones that don't, or ones that you didn't think would do end up working, or you just come up with new ideas as you arrange. And in this case, I think the intervals, I'm just going to leave them out because I can't really find a place for them to go. And also the pad lead is a more complicated or involved version of the same thing. It's the intervals with some root notes and a high C. It's more or less the same thing that's happening here. But if I take it out and just let the bass do the work, this is the first break, so not so much needs to happen. We've essentially just got the tal bassline release coming up and the filter coming up on the lead. Now I have an expression that I use which is I'm not missing anything, which essentially means I'm not hearing a space for anything that needs to be there. And that's really the case with the intervals. We just don't need them, so I'm going to leave them out. Remember, when you get to the arrangement stage of a track, it's often about what you leave out that makes the difference. Give yourself the space to make the elements that you use stand out to their best effect. One of the key mistakes that lots of new producers do is add too much in, and you'll often find that when you have melodic ideas or a lack of melodic ideas, you can try and make up for that by putting in more and more percussive, atmospheric kind of elements, and they just end up clouding the mix. So if in doubt, leave it out. Right, okay, now let's move on to bar 89 and let's remind ourselves of what's going on in this second breakdown. So I've got the pad chords, and the intro string rather is holding on. Okay, so you'll see obviously that most of the changes here involve the introduction of new melodic elements, principally these PWM subdark keys. Now, I did a bit of work on these. I've actually put them on a bus of their own because I've added in a second key line that essentially replicates the first one, but just has a different EQ treatment. I fairly hard pan these ones, which gives me the space to bring in this additional key line with a different kind of delay and a higher register. I've also used the Solid Dynamics compressor, which is another compressor from the Complete 11 range by Native Instruments. And again, it just glues the sounds together and just lets them pop out in the mix quite nicely. And it's a very rhythmic melodic element. It sits in the groove. I've got the skittery arpeggio just coming up in the mix here. And you can hear the legato on the notes, giving it that little eek, kind of squeak at the end of each note. And we have the lead, which is our motif, if you like. Just raise the cutoff slightly. And once again, I've got the pad chords coming. The arpeggio fading down, and this time I'm using the Ramon claps on the tape delay bus to achieve a similar effect to what I had going with the lead in the earlier breakdown, and it's using the same tape delay bus and pretty much the same technique with the feedback. We've got the feedback looping up over 100%, which is giving us that feedback loop effect. Let's listen to it on the clap. See there, it's been sent to the bus. And it's creating the feedback loop, which I then remove by dropping it down below 100%. But this time it carries on into the next section of the track, very subtly. You'll hear it coming up in the mix there. We'll come back to that in a second. So essentially with this breakdown, I'm replicating what happened in the previous one. I'm using the pad chords again, I'm bringing them up on the filter, and I'm using the release to let them hang. But this time I've also got the arpeggio and I'm letting the delay work on the claps, because most of the work in the breakdowns is actually being done by the bass line. The same idea again, the noise filter coming up, VCF envelope cutoff, release on the ADSR envelope, and once again the low frequency on the bass line. And you see that by using those variants of bass lines with different turnaround transition notes, you can create some variety. So whereas before I was using this more straightforward version 2 pattern, in this breakdown I'm using version 3, which has some grace notes and turnarounds and, you know, just a little variation in the pattern. And I made a fairly conscious decision to keep the drum bus fairly full, even in the breakdowns, because I want to keep the tension. You know, I don't want to lose too much of the track. So if I took it out, for example, it would still sound good, but I'm not getting that rhythmic tension that I get when the drums are in. Okay, let's hear what happens next. So this is where I introduce the secondary arpeggio. This is the ANA ARP, or the ANA ARP, our Sonic Academy resident bad boy. And it's just a very simple square wave with some effects. But it sits nicely in that space. And I've also reintroduced the intro string. 606 hats coming back in. And you'll notice the bass line is just switching between B flat and C, which is creating tension. We're not resolving down to G or changing to D, it's just switching between the two, which gives us a great place to move to D around about here. We're switching the intro string to a high D, changing the chord and changing the notes in the arpeggio. Using the same techniques of opening the envelope on the bass line, adding tape delay to the claps, and just holding everything on a D, which gives us the tension that we need to introduce the M1. I could use a bit of reverb actually. Just gonna add some. I just think platinum verb would do the job. And I've given this a slightly different EQ treatment. A bit more emphasis in the high frequencies. And that's our last melodic element. So by switching to the D, we give ourselves a platform to bring that in. I might reintroduce the sweep. I'm just going to use that trick again, just to reduce the gain on that one, because we have other white noise elements at that point as well. And you'll see at this point, because I want the bass to be the main focus of that drop, when the drums come back in, it's less about the melodics, it's more about the relationship between the kick and the bass. And to emphasize that, I've introduced some ride hats and some data life hats that we made earlier with Stylus RMX. Kind of high frequency hat push. And they're both kind of operating in the same area. The data life is more of a shaker, and the ride just gives it that intensity, that push. What's always interesting about putting these ride hats and kind of high frequency shakers alongside the white noise, they tend to get masked. When the white noise hits, the frequencies in the white noise tends to mask out those hats until it dies away, and then the hats will take over. And you can hear that more effectively when the whole mix is playing. And you'll notice with the bass, pretty much the same thing again, except I'm not using the noise filter and the envelope here, I'm just using the EQ cutoff. Because I wanted that drop to be more about the M1 stab than the opening bass line. And using the rev kick to emphasize the drums coming back in. just holding everything on D until we get to bar 201, and then we can start to move the bass line around again. To B flat and back to C. And that gives us the opportunity to bring back in the lead. Start to fade out the ride. And we're bringing the lead up. Cut off and release. Morse keys again. Same techniques. Except on the M1 this time, I'm sending that to the NI verb bus. I'm going to isolate that so you can hear that. Could probably take out some of those low frequencies, or put them back in rather. Wait a second, this isn't sending to the right bus, hold on. There we go. Let's get this effect working. I think this was a hangover from when I was doing it to a different bus, and it's not actually on that auxiliary now. That's more like it. Let's hear that in context. This is like a resolution of the melodics. This is where they finish in the track. So I use this little stab chord at the end to kind of finish things off. And that works nicely. In fact, I could even bring the filter down slightly on that. Maybe not that much. That's good. Just using that final bassline transition. And once again, just keeping the drum bus fairly full because I just really like the bounce in the track. I don't feel the need to take elements out really. And then a slightly more filtered stab chord at the end. Probably take the lin out, but you know, it's personal taste. I don't mind it. Nice delayed penguins at the end. Now let's just take a look at the master channel now that I'm pretty happy with the arrangement. And I'm going to use some stock Logic plugins to apply some mastering. Okay, so when it comes to mastering, my personal watchword is it's a different skill set. You know, I've typically taken so much time on the track getting the mix right that if I have somebody who I trust who does this for a living, then I'm happy, and I do have people who I trust, I'm happy to let them take care of the mastering process. Imagine being a miner and you're at a coal face and you've been mining away for so long at this you know, big face of coal, you've basically got your nose pressed to the coal. And somebody who's coming in fresh, they can see the whole thing. And you've been working so closely on this that you may not be able to hear things that need to be worked on. And that's effectively what a good mastering engineer will do. But what I'm going to do is show a few little things that you can do just using Logic stock plugins. So the first thing I want to do is just loop up a certain part of the track where things are quite loud. And I'm going to add a compressor. And the watchword with anything to do with mastering really is light touch, you know, just a decibel here or there, or just a small threshold on your compressor. Don't overdo it, because you can really ruin what might otherwise be a good mix, and you know, and that is one of the reasons why mastering engineers will tell you to take everything off the master, not just to let them have headroom and space to go at the track, but just to kind of take off any potential mistakes that you may have added. So this compressor, let's pull the threshold all the way up. I'm just pulling it down till we start to hear it kick around about there. We're just trying to pull in some of the peaks. That's pretty good. Add some EQ as well and use the analyzer. And you can see pretty much that the spectrum of sounds. The bass is really kicking around 68. There's plenty of highs in the track. Again, you know, with things like this, if it doesn't need it, be very careful about adding and taking away. One nice thing you can do is use the direction mixer, and that works on the higher frequencies. You can either pull them completely out of phase or bring them in closer, and you don't want them too close because you want to have a fairly nice stereo spread without bringing them, you know, crazily out of phase in the mix. And I may as well introduce you to some of the metering tools. Where are we now? Multimeter. It's a combined analyzer and goniometer, as my American friends might say. Gives you a visual representation of the spatial sound. And you can see that changing as I change the direction mixer. Once again, the watchword is light touch. Don't go crazy. And the analyzer is a great tool. It acts in the same way as the analyzer on the EQ, but just maybe gives you a more metered response. Just by adjusting those very low frequencies on the EQ. I can roll off some of that stuff below 25, which isn't really necessary for the mix. And one final thing you could add, And again, this is not something I use all the time because I tend to find limiting tracks can squash them and crush your peaks and all that kind of stuff, but you can add a limiter. Slightly duck the volume there. Again, this is personal taste. I'm not a huge fan of the adapted limiter. It has a harsh edge that I don't typically like. And like I say, I find it much better to turn your tape delay off. That's much better. But no, I find it much better to get a really good pre-master, get your levels right in the mix, get your levels right as you're working the track, and then give yourself a pre-master with plenty of headroom, and you can take that and work with that. Okay, I'm pretty happy with that. You've been watching my course in how to make a space disco track. Don't forget to head over to www.sonicacademy.com for lots of other tutorials and cool videos, tips and tricks. You can follow me on Facebook at Paolo Mojo or Instagram at Paolo Mojo. I've had a lot of fun putting this track together, and I hope you have too. Thank you for watching.